Picture this. It's early 1916, and Lieutenant Colonel Peter Norman Nissen is trudging through the quagmire of Ypres, France, watching British soldiers huddled in collapsing canvas tents. The Western Front wasn't just claiming lives through bullets and gas, it was killing men through simple exposure to the elements. Nissen, a Canadian-born mining engineer who'd spent years designing stamp mills in the goldfields of Ontario and South Africa, saw the problem with an engineer's clarity. Thousands of corrugated iron sheets lay stacked near supply depots, unused and rusting because nobody could figure out how to turn them into shelter quickly enough to matter. The traditional approach to military construction was killing soldiers before they even reached the front lines. Timber was vanishing faster than forests could supply it. Skilled carpenters were dying in trenches, and every conventional building took weeks to complete. Weeks soldiers didn't have when temperatures dropped below freezing and German artillery rained down indiscriminately.
What Nissen conceived between April 16th and 18th, 1916, wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary in its refusal to be clever. He looked at those curved, corrugated metal sheets and realized something every architect had missed. What if the walls and the roof were the same thing? What if you eliminated the entire concept of framing, support beams, and skilled labor altogether? His prototype was audacious in its minimalism. Take corrugated steel sheets, bend them into a perfect half-cylinder, bolt them together in overlapping sections, and you're done. No internal framework, no foundation required. 6 soldiers with basic instructions could build it in 3 days, and the world record would eventually drop to just 1 hour and 27 minutes. It was architecture stripped down to its absolute essence. Curved metal that shed rain and shrapnel, bolted together so tightly that the structure supported itself through pure geometry. When Nissen presented his design to the British Army Command in March 1916, he made one promise that would change military logistics forever. Any infantryman with basic instructions can build this in 3 days, and everything fits on a single lorry. The Army tested his claim immediately at Richborough Port, where the 172nd Tunneling Company erected 20 huts in April 1916. Each shelter measured 16 feet wide, used approximately 600 square feet of corrugated steel, and was weatherproof within hours. By June 1916, Nissen huts were appearing across every British sector of the Western Front like mushrooms after rain. The War Office placed its first massive order in August, 10,000 units manufactured and shipped before winter. What made this possible wasn't just the design simplicity, it was the complete elimination of skilled labor from the construction equation. Traditional military buildings required carpenters, masons, engineers, and weeks of careful work. Nissen's system needed none of that. The corrugated sheets arrived pre-drilled with holes spaced exactly 14 inches apart. Wooden end walls came as prefabricated panels. The foundation was optional. Crews could bolt the hut directly to wooden sleepers or even to packed earth if they were desperate. During the Battle of the Somme in late 1916, construction units were erecting Nissen huts within artillery range, assembling them while shells screamed overhead, providing immediate shelter for wounded men being evacuated from the nightmare of the trenches. A sergeant and 5 exhausted privates could unload materials, lay out the base, and have a structure weatherproof before nightfall, even under fire. The dimensions were calculated for maximum efficiency and human need. The 16-foot width allowed 2 rows of bunks with a central aisle, housing 30 men comfortably or 50 when desperation demanded it. The curved roof rose to about 15 feet at its peak, high enough that men could stand upright throughout most of the interior without cracking their skulls. Ventilation came from adjustable panels at each end, and the corrugated steel's natural air gaps prevented the condensation problems that turned canvas tents into damp, disease-breeding nightmares. By the armistice on November 11, 1918, British forces had deployed over 100,000 Nissen huts across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. They served as everything: barracks, hospitals, ammunition dumps, supply depots, command posts. Anywhere the Army needed instant infrastructure, a Nissen Hut appeared. Fast forward to September 1940, 15 months before Pearl Harbor dragged America into the war. Commander George F. Dorrit of the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks arrived in Britain with explicit orders: study British temporary construction methods and determine if they could support American military expansion. Dorrit spent 6 weeks touring RAF bases, Army camps, and Royal Navy installations across England and Scotland, and his classified report filed in November 1940 devoted 18 pages to the Nissen Hut. His conclusion was direct: the Nissen Hut is the fastest field structure ever designed, but American forces will need modifications. The modifications began immediately after December 7, 1941. The Navy Civil Engineering Corps chose Quonset Point Naval Air Station in Rhode Island as the development site. Commander John Barney Cyrus led the design team, working with Dorrit's specifications and actual Nissen Hut blueprints that the British government provided under Lend-Lease arrangements. The first American prototype emerged in February 1942, and while it looked superficially similar to its British predecessor, it carried fundamental differences that would affect every unit built thereafter. American engineers fundamentally changed the structural logic. Where Nissen used corrugated sheets as self-supporting elements bolted directly together, the Quonset design introduced an internal steel framework. This framework consisted of curved steel arches, essentially ribs made from formed steel channels that stood independently and supported the corrugated panels. The panels no longer carried structural loads, they were cladding, attached to the frame with self-tapping screws rather than through bolts. Cyrus argued this approach would create stronger buildings capable of supporting heavier equipment loads and providing better anchor points for electrical and plumbing systems. He was absolutely correct on both counts, but he'd introduced a complexity that Nissen had deliberately avoided. The framework requirement meant Quonset huts arrived at deployment sites as more components requiring more assembly steps. A standard 40-foot Quonset needed 14 steel arch ribs, each weighing approximately 90 pounds, positioned at specific intervals and bolted to foundation plates. Only after the frame was complete could crews attach the corrugated panels. Nissen assemblies started with the panels themselves and built outward. This philosophical difference, framework first versus panels first, added between 12 and 18 hours to construction time based on tests conducted at Quonset Point in March 1942. Navy officials accepted the time trade-off because they prioritized building permanence over deployment speed. American planal doctrine assumed most bases would be occupied for years, not weeks. The Quonset also incorporated features absent from the Nissen design. Interior insulation became standard, with blankets of fiberglass sandwiched between steel panels and interior plywood lining. Electrical conduits were integrated into the framework during assembly, rather than surface-mounted afterward. Wooden floors replaced the Nissen's packed earth or wooden duckboards. Windows were larger and included screens. Doors used American standard hardware instead of British hinges and latches. Each improvement made sense from a comfort and functionality standpoint. And each added weight, components, and assembly time. A complete Quonset Hut package weighed approximately 30% more than equivalent Nissen materials, requiring more trucks or rail cars for transport. By May 1942, the Navy had standardized 3 Quonset sizes: 20 feet wide, 40 feet wide, and the largest at 50 feet wide. Production contracts went to the George A. Fuller Company and the Strand Steel Corporation, both experienced with prefabricated steel construction. The first mass-produced units shipped to naval stations in June 1942. The real-world tests came in the Pacific Theater. When the 1st Marine Division began receiving Quonset huts on Guadalcanal in February 1943, after months of fighting in muddy tent camps, construction crews discovered the harsh realities of complex systems in combat zones. The steel framework components were too hot to handle with bare hands by mid-morning in 100-degree heat with 80% humidity. Crews worked abbreviated schedules, dawn until 10 a.m., then evening until dark, which stretched 5-day construction estimates into 2-week realities. Meanwhile, Australian forces supporting operations from Port Moresby used Nissen pattern huts manufactured in Sydney. These simplified versions eliminated even the wooden end walls, using corrugated steel throughout, and construction teams reported average assembly times of 36 hours. When Admiral Chester Nimitz ordered the development of Funafuti Atoll in the Ellis Islands during March 1943, Navy planners needed housing for 5,000 personnel within 60 days. The 2nd Naval Construction Battalion arrived with both Quonset materials and some British Nissen huts acquired through Commonwealth supply channels. Battalion Commander Lieutenant Commander Joseph Blondin split his crews to test both systems under identical coral atoll conditions. His official report in May 1943 provided exact figures. Nissen huts averaged 54 hours from first foundation timber to completed structure. Quonset huts averaged 91 hours, with the gap attributed primarily to framework alignment and interior finishing requirements.
The speed differential became critical during emergency expansions. After the Battle of Midway in June 1942, the Navy needed immediate hospital capacity at Pearl Harbor for incoming wounded. The existing hospital couldn't accommodate the surge, so construction battalions erected temporary ward buildings adjacent to the main facility. Using Quonset huts with their required foundations, frameworks, and interior systems would have meant a 2-week construction timeline. Instead, crews used a hybrid approach: Nissen-style corrugated shells erected in 3 days, with interior medical equipment installed afterward. Those emergency wards remained in service through 1944, housing over 2,000 patients during their operational period. Weather resistance revealed unexpected trade-offs. Quonset insulation kept interiors comfortable in extreme heat and cold, but the complex wall assembly created moisture traps. In the Aleutian Islands during 1943, where fog and rain were constant, Quonset huts developed condensation between the exterior steel and interior plywood, leading to rust and mold. Nissen huts, with their single-layer construction and natural ventilation through corrugation gaps, stayed drier despite being less comfortable. American industrial capacity transformed the Quonset into a mass production phenomenon that the handcrafted Nissen could never match. By July 1943, the Strand Steel Corporation's factory in Richmond, Indiana, was producing 200 complete Quonset hut packages daily, shipping them to both coasts for Pacific and European deployment. The George A. Fuller Company's plant in Pennsylvania added another 150 units per day. This production volume, over 100,000 huts annually, required standardization so rigid that
that every component had to be interchangeable across all units. The standardization philosophy extended beyond just physical dimensions. Quonset huts came in exactly 3 widths, 20, 40, and 50 feet, with lengths in 10-foot increments. This modular approach meant logistics officers could calculate shipping requirements precisely. Cost accounting revealed where American engineering priorities diverged from British expediency. In 1943, a complete 40 by 20-foot Quonset hut cost the Navy approximately $850, including all materials, hardware, insulation, electrical components, and flooring. A comparable Nissen Hut, based on British production records from 1918, cost approximately $230 in inflation-adjusted 1943 currency. The Quonset's superior comfort and electrical systems justified the higher price in American procurement doctrine, but that 300% cost increase mattered significantly when multiplying across thousands of units. The real divergence between Nissen and Quonset legacies appeared not during wartime, but in the decade after. When World War II ended in August 1945, the United States military found itself with approximately 70,000 surplus Quonset huts scattered across domestic bases that were rapidly closing. The War Assets Administration began selling complete Quonset huts to civilians in 1946 for prices between $200 and $600, depending on size and condition. That same year, over 15,000 Quonsets were purchased by farmers, small businesses, and housing desperate families across America. The huts' integrated floors, insulation, and electrical systems made them immediately habitable as homes, workshops, or storage buildings. This civilian adoption created an American architectural phenomenon that lasted decades. Britain took the opposite approach with Nissen huts after 1945. The military wanted them gone because they symbolized wartime austerity. Thousands were dismantled, with the corrugated panels sold as scrap metal during the post-war steel shortage. By 1955, most Nissen huts had vanished from Britain except on remote military ranges and agricultural properties, where practicality outweighed aesthetics. The fundamental lesson embedded in the Nissen versus Quonset story is that military logistics doesn't always benefit from engineering improvement. Peter Nissen created his hut by asking one question: what's the absolute minimum needed to keep soldiers dry and alive? His answer, curved corrugated metal bolted together, ignored every conventional building principle. No foundations, no framing, no skilled labor required, just metal sheets and bolts. That ruthless simplicity meant a sergeant and 5 exhausted infantrymen could build shelter in 72 hours while under artillery fire. The American engineers who designed the Quonset asked a different question: how can we make this more comfortable and permanent? Their answer was objectively better architecture, but practically worse emergency shelter. When the 1st Marine Division was fighting in Guadalcanal mud during late 1942, having a weatherproof structure in 3 days would have mattered more than having an insulated, electrified structure in 10 days. The 170,000 Quonset huts America produced represented genuine industrial achievement and provided shelter for millions of personnel across every theater. They served well in their intended role as semi-permanent base infrastructure, but they couldn't match what 6 British soldiers accomplished in 1916, building weatherproof shelter in 3 days with nothing but hand tools and determination. The corrugated curved huts still standing across farmland and former military sites are monuments to different philosophies. The surviving Quonsets prove American engineering made them durable enough to outlast their intended purpose. The vanished Nissen huts proved British engineering made them simple enough that armies could build them anywhere, anytime, under any conditions, and then abandon them without regret when the front lines moved forward. Both approaches worked, but only one could be built while the shells were still falling, and that's the difference between architectural success and battlefield necessity.